Ash, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make this what I like to call an information architecture structure. And this is something that I've used to visualize some of the data collected in one of my projects that I've been working on. And the structure is kind of inspired by the work of Muriel Cooper and her explorations of type in 3D spaces. And so I wanted to take that to more dynamic and fluid looking systems, um, as well as incorporating images. And also a huge thanks to Acrylic Code on YouTube. I'll link their tutorial below because that really helped me build the basis of this structure. All right, so let's begin. To take you over the structure of this network, we have a geotext that is referencing this dat table, which is just a sentence, a string of text that is separated into individual entries in a table. And then we are manipulating those letters using a pattern chop. And then we do the same to manipulate the movement of these instanced images. And then we finally put everything together. So it's a pretty simple system. And I also have these two sliders that can kind of control some aspects of the network. And so you can zoom in and out, expand and retract. And yeah, it's up to you if you want to add more modifications to the system, but let's just begin with how to create this. All right, I'm going to delete. So I've deleted my system and let's start from scratch. Um, Over here, I just have my camera running in the background and out. Okay, so let's start by placing a geotext. In this geotext, you can see we already have some sample text, and we're going to change this to specification dat or chop. I'm going to link this container below, which is just what I'm using to take a sentence and put that into individual entries in a table. And in this, when you want to update the text, if you hit pulse, you'll be able to update whatever text you want. Make sure your text is right after the dollar sign, so make sure you include that in your sentence. And then from here, we're going to connect a null. We are also going to make a chop constant. And in this, we are going to reference the number of rows in our string of text. So to do that, we go into, let's just change this to characters, and we can change the value to an expression, and we're going to use this expression to, it's basically taking the number of rows and -1 because the first one is just the 0. Alrighty. And now we can take this null, and we don't need to do that, and put that into our, so you can see all of our text is visible over here, but it's all placed on top of each other. It's not, can't really read it. So now we're going to manipulate text using a pattern chop. Where's pattern? Okay. In our pattern chop, we have a sine wave, and we want the length to be the same as the number of characters in our sentence. And so we're again going to reference this constant in our length. And we are also going to update the amplitude to 360. And then we are going to make a copy of this. And oh, also let's change the channel to TX. And this one should be TY. And then we're going to go and change this to cosine and then merge these two. Okay. From here, we can create a null, and then in our geotext, For the specification chop, we're going to use our null 2. Okay, so now it's not really visible yet, but let's up the font, maybe 10. And there we go. We can see our string of text is now spread across a circle. And if we go into our pattern, let's look at the number of cycles. Now, as we increase the number of cycles, we can see this kind of wave forming. So I'm going to keep this as 5.48, and I'm going to keep pattern 2 as 0.48. This is just I'm eyeballing it. Okay. Now let's add a render. First, let's see, let's add a camera, let's add light, and let's also add render. Okay. Okay. Now in our camera, let's right click and active, right click, let's go to homing direction front. There we go, now we can see everything. Let's do the same over here, front, and zoom in. Okay. Now we can see everything in our render over here, but it's not moving. So if we go into our pattern chop and let's see what happens if we up the phase. Whoa. And that starts moving. So just let's use ABS time dot, did I spell that right? ABS time dot seconds into 0.2. Nice, but it's a bit fast, so let's move that to 0.1 or maybe 0.05. Okay, so we've got some motion into our string of text. And let me just add that to an RGB key to make that visible. Perfect. I think I'm going to zoom out a little bit. Okay. So we've got our text, we've got it moving. Now we just need our images. For the images, we're gonna open up another geometry op, and if we right click, we can go into operator snippets. And inside the geometry operator snippets, there's a really nice texture instancing example where we see these nice floating images that are or not floating, rotating. Okay, so we're just going to copy this for now and bring that into our network. Right, so we already see that motion over here. And let's look at this network. We have a sphere that is being translated, rotating. We have a sop to chop, and we have a pattern that is referencing the number of images inside this instancing container, which if you click inside has a bunch of movie file ints. And there's a geometry, and that's just being rendered. Okay. So what we need to do is let's create a copy of our patterns because we want our images to be moving in the same way as the text. Okay. And what we also need is this text index, this pattern chop to reference the number of images also. And let's add that to the merge. Perfect. So we have all three things needed to use in our geo. So first we're just going to delete that. Okay. And now there is an error because there's no reference for the instance. So it was using the previous null 3. Instead, we're going to reference this null 5. Let's open that up and add that to here. Awesome. So now we have the images moving with the text. It's kind of hard to see, but the text is still there. And there's still an error because there's no TZ, and that's fine. We can just get rid of that. Okay. Now, if we go into our, if you want to manipulate these two differently, let's have two different renders going, and we're just going to add that to a component later. So in this second render, let's only have can do, yes, and let's only use Geo2. So now we only have the images, and in com, let's bring down the scale. No? Okay, awesome. And perhaps let's make it a little bit bigger. Okay. And in our render 1, what we want is to only render geotext, whoops, geotext 1. Okay. Now we can only see letters because we haven't actually added this render to the component. Let's get rid of this out. And let's add this to comp1. Perfect. So now we have these two moving in sync. Let's go into the instance and update our image folder. So if you click the source folder, click on the plus sign and you can use, I'm just going to use this folder of images that I had for my project. Great, now the images have been updated, the text is updated. All of these chops are being used for the geotext 1, and this is used for the instance images. And so let's see what happens if we bring down the amplitude. Whoa, okay. And so that's bringing down the amplitude of the X value. And we are going to make this 180. Okay, I like that. Let's create a slider that can take you from 180 to 360. So let's open up a slider and connect that to a null. Within our slider, let's change this from 180 to 360. Okay. And the value can be, I don't know, whatever. Let's make it 180 for now. Okay. And now if we make that active and go into our pattern 4, which is our sine wave, let's use that as the amplitude reference. Great. Now if we make the slider active, we can see this updating. There we go. Beautiful. Now this is pretty, but we can't really see the images. So how can we make that part interactive? And this is why it's great to have two cameras that are individually, this one's looking at just the letters, and this one is looking at the images. Because now, look what happens if we update the scale. Maybe not that much. Nice. We can zoom in to the images and zoom out. So let's set the range. Right now it's at -43. And when it's zoomed in, we want it to be maybe at -6. Okay. So let's go into here and create a copy. This one, let's call this zoom, and let's call this one amplitude, amp. Okay, in our zoom, let's change that. What was it? Oh, I forgot. Let's change this to minus 40 to minus 6. And let's change the value to minus 40 for now. Okay, let's make that active. Let's go back into our camera and let's take that null to set the scale. Great. Now, if we make this active, we'll be able to zoom into these images and zoom out. You might want to make them make the movement a bit slower, and you can do that by going back into your pattern 4 and updating your multiplication to maybe 0.01, and that's now it's moving really slow. And if you zoom in, like the active, you can kind of see all of the images. Okay, so that's the basic structure of this. There's a lot of modifications you can do as per your liking. You can add more sliders and or change up the waves. Let's look at this pattern one. If we change up the number of cycles, we can get some really cool effects. If we make this 1, that would be also pretty cool. And yeah, I think that's pretty much the end of this tutorial. But yeah, this was how to make my information architecture structure. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave them below in the comments. Thank you. Bye.